And without it, God can't be good, loving, or just. So at that point, we can say the God that is described as these things can't exist. Hey folks, welcome to Joel Reads Bible. I'm Joel and I read the Bible so that you don't have to, but this is not going to be an episode where I read a chapter of the Bible or I do a recap about the Bible. I'm going to be talking about free will. And in this video, I am going to show you that as a Christian, you do not have free will. I know you want to have free will. I know that free will is the answer to the problem of suffering. I know that free will is the only thing that can make sense of the carrot and stick coercive love relationship that you want to have with your Savior. I know that free will is a pillar of Christianity. Once it's gone, you either have to become a hardcore Calvinist, which nobody wants to be, or leave the religion entirely. Unfortunately, free will is not reflected in the Bible. And it doesn't even make any logical sense if you want to believe in your God. And we're going to talk about it. I want to say at the beginning, I'm not a philosopher, okay? I don't know all the fancy philosophy terms, and I'm not going to be using philosophy speak in this video. I'm going to be speaking practically in plain English about the concept, as I understand it, of free will and choices and these sorts of things. It might get a little complicated at times, and we are going to tackle a lot of different angles on free will, but this isn't going to be super technical. And hey, I might miss some things that you can put in the comments to educate me more about free will. But this is how I understand it. And so far, I haven't really heard any arguments that derail my understanding of this subject. So the first thing I want to do is define our terms to a degree. I want to give you the dictionary definition of free will. And then once I give it to you, we're going to throw it in the garbage. It is not what you mean when you say free will. The dictionary definition of free will: the power of acting without the constraint of necessity or fate. Okay, the ability to act at one's own discretion. So what that seems to be saying is a free will decision has to be a decision made without having to make the decision, or some sort of fate befalling you because you made the decision. It seems very difficult to imagine a world where this level of free will exists. Or it's very, very obvious that we are beings which do not have this level of free will. Everything we do has consequences. Everything we do has fate. Every cause we cause has an effect, right? And things affect us. We'll get into that later. Even choosing to drink this glass of water is not entirely a free will choice. I have to drink water. That's necessity. If I want to go and jump off my balcony, there's going to be fate involved. I can't just do that and fly away. So it's not really a free will choice. I don't have the free will to jump off my balcony, land, not break anything, and feel perfectly fine and run away. We don't have free will based on the dictionary definition. I think that's pretty obvious. So we can just throw that away because you don't mean that definition when you say free will. So when Christians talk about free will, and when I spoke about free will when I was a Christian, I did not mean the dictionary definition of free will, because if I did, it would be so obvious that we didn't have free will. What I meant was something that people might call free choice. Even though there's consequences, I am still free to make that choice. I have the agency to make that choice. I have the autonomy to make the choice. These are all just different words that sort of seem like the same thing, but they don't have that level of free will that probably only a God would have. In a lot of my videos, I mentioned that God does things that are arbitrary at his whim. That is free will. Although there may be consequences for us, there are no consequences for him. He has complete power and there's nothing necessary for God because he's God, right? So I would say that God, if anyone, is the only one that has free will. So when we're talking about being able to make a free choice or having agency over the choices that we make, the way I think of it, and this is really where it falls apart for me, you have to be able to make this choice entirely free from influence. I would say that as soon as you're somewhat influenced, free will, I'm going to call it free will colloquially, but just so you know, I'm not referencing the dictionary definition. I'm using more of the agency, being able to make a choice that's free from influence sort of thing, where we're still constrained by our reality, but we're still free to make a choice. So I don't think that if I am influenced, that I can call my choice free. If I don't choose my influences, how can I claim that the thing that I do that is compelled by those influences is free? And this idea comes from determinism, and I'm using that term loosely because I know there's many different types of determinism and they all have different variations. So I'm just gonna, again, not get too deep in the technical stuff. So I'm just gonna spell out how I understand it. And again, I'm very open to responses in the comments. Determinism under naturalism seems to be that we as people are a mix of our parents' DNA, and we come out of the womb as a particular person. We're born at a particular time in history, particular time of the day. If you believe the zodiac sign, I mean, you don't choose your zodiac sign. And if that does affect you in any way, you know, that's an influence. But we have a particular race, particular intellectual capacity. If you've ever spoken to a parent, they'll be like, oh yeah, Joel was like that from day one. You could see that personality from a very young age. The personality was coming out. Like, this is who that kid always was. You're born with a lot of that stuff. And of course, your environment does affect your genes so that they present in different ways. That's been seen in different studies. Your biology is an incredible influence. That is who you are. And you did not choose that. You don't choose your biology. You don't choose your parents. You don't choose the amount of money that your parents have. You don't choose your sex. You don't choose anything that makes who you are. You're born as that thing. As you go through life, the thing that already you haven't chosen, that vessel, starts being influenced by everything around you. By those parents, or maybe one parent, or maybe foster parents, by school teachers, by whether or not you were breastfed, by whether or not you were spoken to with kindness. You can think of countless variables, all that are going to have an effect on who you are. They're going to affect your biology. They're going to affect your mind. But by the time you can kind of think that you're making decisions and not just reacting, the choice that you're making is an illusion of choice. Because all it is your biological influences and environmental influences reacting to the stimuli that's coming at you. The reason why that's not free is because you didn't choose any of those things. And you can't transcend them. You can't get outside of them in order to make a decision that that vessel wouldn't make. It doesn't make any logical sense. So that's my understanding of determinism under naturalism. You, as a Christian, you may be like, yeah, obviously, without God, you don't have any free will. You're just a puppet. You're just a robot. But I would say that with God, you absolutely also do not have any free will. But here's what I've been calling theistic determinism. So it's the idea that we have an all-knowing creator. But because he's the creator and he's all-knowing, he is creating you specifically and deliberately from scratch. And if you want to read Psalms 139, 16 to 19, it describes this. A lot of you will know it. You knit me together in my mother's womb. When I was in the darkest place, you knew me. You've made my innermost being. All my days were ordained by you. God has created us. He's programmed our DNA. If you're a Christian who's heard the intelligent design argument, you'll hear that DNA is like a computer language. It's like a code. There needs to be a coder. Okay. Well, God coded that DNA. Somebody wrote that. That's an algorithm. That doesn't have free will. That's been programmed specifically and deliberately to do a task. And he knows how that program is going to work. He's programmed that computer program to run a certain way. He could do a different code and know that there would be a different outcome. He's in complete control. God doesn't just know what you're going to do. God makes you to do it. He has created you in such a way to do what you're going to do. So when you make a choice, this is a choice that God made you to make. There's no room for free will there. I just cannot logically fathom the place where all of a sudden free will exists. Maybe there are some workarounds here, right? Maybe God didn't create us specifically and deliberately. All right, maybe he closed his eyes and he started doing the programming and he's like, all right, I don't know what that is. Let me send him in. But then he's not really all knowing, right? Maybe God doesn't make each individual person. Maybe he just started with Adam and Eve. Yes, but then he programmed Adam and Eve and knew that those combos were going to result in the rest of it. He still made Eve and programmed her specifically and deliberately to eat the fruit. There's no way that we can avoid God being in control of how all this is going to play out. And there's no way for there to be an element of free will here. Well, maybe God limits his knowledge. That's a difficult thing for me to understand. One, because the Bible just doesn't tell us that God, in his creation, limits his knowledge. And later on in the video, we're going to read a bunch of verses that illustrate that there's no free will in the Bible. But logically speaking, it's difficult for me to imagine a God limiting his knowledge, but doesn't he then have to already know what he doesn't want to know? It just seems counterintuitive that that would be logically possible. But maybe it is. Maybe you have some sort of equation that would make that work. So Christians want to say that, well, we just have free will. The idea of free will just becomes a magical claim, just another Christian magical claim. There's no logic to it. It has to be some sort of like, swing, God gave us free will. No, but he gave us free will. No, but he gave us free will. But free will is not a good thing for us. I don't know if it's a good thing for God. I don't think it is if he loves us. If free will is the answer to the problem of suffering, so why is there so much violence in this world and pain and suffering? Well, it's because we have free will. God doesn't want to take away our free will, so he lets us do what we're going to do. It's our choices. Then take away the free will. Like if the free will is a curse, I don't know about you, I would gladly give up my free will so that the 600,000 people who are getting sexually assaulted this year won't get assaulted. I would gladly do that. 3 million people are going to die of starvation this year. Take my free will. Take my free will. I won't know the difference. Don't allow for all this suffering, God. Hell is a consequence of free will, if you believe that doctrine. Billions of souls burning in hell for eternity is because of free will. So let's not do the free will. I like pass on the horrible free will and let's get those people out of hell. Everyone makes the right decision because God programs them to make the right decision. So I don't need the magical free will, God. So please answer me in the comments. What do we gain by having free will? What do we get? The ability to love God freely with coercion? The ability to accept God's heaven gift or his hell consequence just so that we can make a choice that is 100% coerced? Is that what we're doing this for? I don't think it's worth it. I don't think relationship with God is worth the billions of souls burning in hell. I don't even think it's worth the earthly pain and suffering that humankind has endured throughout the ages. I don't think that's worth it. I want you to realize, if you're a Christian, that you also don't want free will. I'm willing to give it up. You're probably going, no, I would never give up my free will. But you're lying, because your whole goal is to give up your free will. Whose will do you want to know? Whose will would you love to know? It's God's will, isn't it? You want to know God's will. And do you want to live within that will? Yeah, you probably want to live within God's will, because when I'm living within God's will, things go well for me. Have you ever heard that idea? I doubt it's biblical, but it might be. Jesus, how are we supposed to pray? Thy will be done? We don't want our will. As Christians, it's like your will. I don't want my will to have anything to do with this. You really only want free will long enough to submit to God's will and give it up entirely. So you don't even like your own free will. Proverbs 16:3 says, "Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and he will establish your plans." Christians do not want free will. They want God to take over. They want it to be him establishing their plans. He's in the driver's seat. Jesus, take the wheel. So we don't have free will logically. We say there's magical free will to excuse all the pain and suffering. So AKA, it's the cause of all the pain and suffering. And if we become Christians, we want to get rid of that free will immediately. So that's a wild cognitive dissonance that Christians have over this thing called free will. So next we have the idea that God respects free will. This is also something that you'll hear when you're talking about the problem of suffering, is that God gives us free will. He can't step in. He can't change anything. We have free will, and he has to give us that free will so that we have the free choice to love him or whatever. So free will is this sacred thing until God haphazardly tampers with it at his will. Now, of course, I don't believe there's free will at all. So whenever you see what we could call infringing on free will in the Bible, it's not infringing on free will. It's just God doing his will in different ways. But you believe there is free will, so I'll do a little bit of an internal critique. When the Hebrews are leaving Egypt and God makes the Egyptians disposed to giving them all their stuff, that is an infringement on free will. So God doesn't care about the free will. He's not that concerned with it. He's not worried at all, actually. I use that one because when I use the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, which is obviously an infringement of free will, people say, well, it's because Pharaoh hardened his heart before, and so it was his choice, blah, blah, blah. That's a weak apologetic. God hardened Pharaoh's heart so Pharaoh couldn't soften his heart in that moment. That's an infringement on free will. If he's controlling the amount of hardness a heart is, then that is an infringement on free will. There's no other way to see that. And so when God wants to do something, in that case, show his glory, he will gladly infringe on free will. It doesn't matter what Pharaoh wanted, right? And we see this many different times in the Bible. And the reason why I bring up the Egyptians giving their stuff is because that infringement on free will is very flippant. Like what's happening there is just like, hey, give them a bunch of stuff. We want you to leave with a bunch of gold and different things, probably to build a tabernacle later, but I want you to have a bunch of stuff. So it's a very flippant way to infringe on someone's free will. So when there is a child being molested and we know God is there because he's omnipresent, and we'll say to the person who survived such an event, such a trauma, that the reason why God didn't stop this person and make them, I don't know, positively disposed to not molesting the child or striking them dead, as he did Onan, the reason why he didn't do that is because of their free will, even though he will flippantly impose on someone's free will just to give some shirts to them. And that, to me, is a kick in the throat to the survivor of trauma. It's an absolutely horrific thing to say to that person that God couldn't care less about free will when it comes to certain things. But for some reason, he suddenly cares when you're being raped. Free will is a pretty weak argument when God doesn't respect it. Before we get into Bible verses that seem to illustrate that there is no free will, I also wanted to mention, why did God give Satan free will? What was the point of that? Did he want to have a deep, meaningful love relationship with Satan? He knew that wasn't going to happen. But God gave Lucifer free will, I guess, because he wanted to have a deep, meaningful relationship with him. Then he got all prideful and jealous, which he knew he was going to do, and he created him to do that, logically. But does Lucifer have free will to repent now? Is Satan pure evil if he has free will like we do? Are we pure evil? Well, I think we're going to find out that we are pure evil. I mean, God created beings, us, that every inclination of their heart is evil since childhood. We have a sin nature that is very difficult to get over. We were going to see soon. How can that be free will? Neutral would be free will, right? Like a little bit of both. Yin and yang would be free will. But the Bible tells us that the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? We don't have a choice in any of this. Talk about an influence, right? So all of this points to there not being any free will. And of course, why is this important? Well, if there is no free will, then we can't be making a choice. And so any sort of consequences, like going to hell or incredible suffering, is the master plan of one being, which is God. He wants to see some people in hell, billions and billions of people in hell, and he wants to see a world full of suffering for no reason, because there's no free will as the reason, right? That, I think, discredits and undermines the religion of Christianity entirely. God can't be loving and good and just, and there not be any free will. So there is nothing in the Bible that supports a claim of free will. As I said, free will is a pillar of Christianity, but there is nothing in the Bible that tells us we have free will. It is not in there. There are a few verses that mention choice, like choose this day who you will serve. As I said, we have the illusion of choice. So it might be in reference to that if you want to take it seriously. My first verse here is Ecclesiastes 7:13. Accept the way God does things, for who can straighten what he has made crooked? He's made you crooked, so just accept it. Now, of course, that's probably talking more about like submitting to things not being perfect in the world and, you know, just dealing with your lot in life or something like that. But if you consider us being made crooked, who can straighten that? Things are determined. I'm going to read Psalm 139, and it's actually 13 to 16. For you created my inmost being. I think of that as like who you are on the inside. You knit me together in my mother's womb, and I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. By the way, beautiful poetry. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. It really describes the idea that God is very active in the creation process. He has made you specifically and deliberately, like I said, and he does know everything that's going to happen. And he's actually ordained those days. That makes logical sense, and you can split hairs and argue semantics, but you can't really argue the logic very well. Exodus 28 verse 3, and if you've been watching my videos, you'll know this one. Tell all the skilled workers to whom I have given wisdom in such matters that they are to make garments for Aaron for his consecration, that he may serve me as priest. The reason why I say this is like, if you're good at something, if you're skilled, God has given you the wisdom to be good at it. You don't have a lot to brag about there. He's going to make you good at something or not make you good at something, and that's on him. You don't really have free will in that. You know, it's like the gifts of the Spirit or something like that. There's really no reason to be like, oh, I was able to do this or that. Well, God made you able to do that. So then we have Romans 7, which doubles down on the sin nature element that I was speaking to earlier. It's Romans 7, 15 to 20. I do not understand what I do, for what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good, which to me is like saying, hey, in my head, I know that the law is better. but like I'm compelled to behave differently. Why? As it is no longer I myself who do it, but it is sin living in me. The sin nature he's born with. He can't help that. He doesn't choose that. He has something compelling him. He has an influence that he can't get past. And we know he can't get past it because he tells us, I know that nothing good lives in me, that is, in my sin nature, for I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For what I do is not the good I want to do. No, the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. It's just this internal battle that he can't win. There's no free will there. He's at the will of this sin nature. Now, if I do what I do not want to do, it is no longer I who do it, but sin living in me that does it. So Paul, just like all of us, has something in him that is compelling him to do things. He is influenced by something in him. In this case, it's, I guess, a spiritual thing, the sin nature. But there's no free will there. The question would be, how do I get past that sin nature? The way you get past that, we can kind of see in John 6, verse 44, which goes, no one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I will raise him up at the last day. It is written in the prophets, they will all be taught by God. Everyone who listens to the Father and learns from him comes to me. You need to be drawn. We can't overcome our sin nature without Jesus or the Father or the Holy Spirit, whichever part of the Godhead you want to believe does whatever job. We need that, or we will be stuck in our sin nature. Where's the choice? Where do we have some sort of semblance of choice? And if we go to Romans 9, verses 11 to 22, Paul doubles down on this idea. And he's talking about Jacob and Esau, which if you've been following along, we read about in Genesis. And he's talking about Pharaoh and the hardening of the hearts, which I already mentioned in this video. He says that, yet before the twins were born, Jacob and Esau, or had done anything good or bad, anything that they could deserve favor or not deserve favor, in order that God's purpose and election might stand, not by works, but by him who calls, she was told, which is Rebecca, the mom, the older will serve the younger. Just as it is written, Jacob I have loved, but Esau have I hated. So the plan was already in place. There was nothing they could have done. They didn't do anything good or bad, and we get a little bit more detail. What shall we say? Is God unjust? Paul doesn't think so. He says, not at all. I think so. For he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. It does not therefore depend on man's desire, some translations say will, or effort, but on God's mercy. It doesn't matter what we do. It doesn't matter what we want. God is going to make the call. It's his mercy or not. For the scripture says to Pharaoh, I raised you up for this very purpose, that I might display my power in you, and my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. Remember, it says that in Exodus. This is why he is hardening Pharaoh's heart. Therefore, God has mercy on whom he wants to have mercy, and he hardens whom he wants to harden. So if he's hardening someone, that's his call. It doesn't matter what their desire is. It doesn't matter if they've put in any effort. None of that matters. It doesn't matter if they're good or bad. It doesn't matter what you choose. You don't have choice. God is doing it. He's entirely sovereign. One of you will say to me, then why does God still blame us? For who resists his will? Good question. What would the answer be? What would a satisfying answer be? Not this, but who are you, O man, to talk back to God? Yeah, I've heard it, but I don't like it. Shall what is formed say to him who formed it, why did you make me like this? Does not the potter have the right to make out of the same lump of clay some pottery for noble purposes and some for common use? What if God, choosing to show his wrath and make his power known, bore with great patience the objects of his wrath prepared for destruction? So I don't know if that reads for you the way it reads for me, but God is making some things just for destruction. Some people, like Pharaoh. Pharaoh is an enemy. We're going to destroy him and all the Egyptians because we've hardened Pharaoh's heart so we can show our power. By our, I mean this is God, right? He has all the power. There's no free will there. And in this whole passage, there's no free will for Jacob and Esau, the good guys. Well, not Esau, but Jacob, the good guys. That path has already been chosen. And we see that time and time again in the scriptures. There is so much evidence of it. In Jeremiah 10:23, it says, Lord, I know that people's lives are not their own. It is not for them to direct their steps. God is doing it. He has full control. Logically speaking, there is no free will. God has made us and he knows the future, so he makes us to do what he wants to do. Biblically, there are many passages that support that notion of there not being any free will. So why is it that you still want to believe there's free will? Well, it's because if there is no free will, then God is a horrific barbarian who has created a bunch of sentient robots who can feel and cry and be devastated and wail and suffer unimaginable suffering. And he's put us in this screwed up game for no reason whatsoever other than it must bring him joy to watch us struggle. It must bring him joy to watch us suffer. Once you come to that realization, then you just have to look at the definition of God: good, loving, and just. So if it's true that we don't have free will, and this is the world that God chose for us, and billions of souls go to hell for not choosing him, even though they can't freely choose him without being prompted, then this God, no, is not good, and he's not loving, and he's not just. The conclusion you really have to draw is it's incoherent. It doesn't work as a system. It's flawed. There are too many holes, even in just this idea of free will. There's a lot of other holes in a lot of other Christian doctrine, but in the idea of free will, it's impossible, and without it, God can't be good, loving, or just. So at that point, we can say the God that is described as these things can't exist, right? Unless, of course, we redefine those words, but I don't want to do that. Do you want to do that? Without free will, the Christian God must be false. Could be a different God, could be a malevolent God. Not just a little bit malevolent, mostly malevolent. A horrific God who wants to confuse us. God so loved the world. Okay, well, he doesn't, because he created a bunch of robots just to suffer. So the worldview fails. And that's why whether or not we have free will is incredibly important and worth however long this video ended up being, which is probably too long. But thank you for sticking it out with me. Someday I may make another video about free will. I may have updated thoughts. I may have mulled it over a little bit more, and maybe you guys will enlighten me in the comments. I'll be like, oh, I was wrong about that. I should look into this idea or that idea. But this is my understanding about the topic of free will. I hope it was fairly organized and made sense and flowed, because I did have some notes, but I did also fly by the seat of my pants a little bit. But thank you for sticking it out with me. Thank you for watching my videos and being on this journey with me as I deconstruct my Christian faith, which seems like it was so long ago now. So I almost don't remember believing, if I'm honest. It's weird. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments, and we will see you next time for some more Bible. Bye.